The Institute's mission is to educate, engage, and empower citizens of all ages to actively participate in the civic and political life of their communities and to strengthen democracy. The Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse political issues or candidates. Before we begin the evening's program, I'd like to quickly cover a couple of housekeeping items. If you'll please turn off any cell phones or devices that might make noise. And following tonight's remarks, we'll have a brief question and answer period. So if you have a question, feel free to just walk up to either of the microphones on either side of the auditorium. Tonight we have a panel of 3 men joining us on a mission to raise awareness on the importance of New Hampshire in ending political corruption in Washington, D.C. Harvard law professor and political activist Lawrence Lessig is joined by Governor Buddy Roemer and Cenk Uygur to present a talk from the New Hampshire Rebellion organization called Only New Hampshire Can Save Us. Lessig is the Roy L. Furman Professor at Law at Harvard Law School and director of the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University. He is a prolific author, writing and lecturing about ending government corruption. Lessig was even portrayed once by Christopher Lloyd in a 2005 episode of The West Wing. Roemer served as governor of Louisiana from 1988 to 1992 and was a presidential primary candidate in 2012, stressing the need for campaign finance reform. Roemer continues to be an advocate for reform, joining the New Hampshire Rebellion and its goals. Cenk Uygur is a political commentator, activist, and internet personality who has hosted shows on MSNBC, internet talk radio, and television shows and current TV. He launched a long-term project called the Wolf Pack after seeing the momentum of the Occupy movement, calling it the Super PAC to end all Super PACs. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our speakers tonight.
Just me for now. So we're all going to talk, and then we'll take questions at the end. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. We appreciate that you came out in the cold. So first, I always feel, last 2 nights I felt obliged to explain my clothes. I'm usually in more formal stuff, but they told me we're going to do this long walk, and it's really cold in New Hampshire, and turns out we did. It was a 18.8-mile walk today from Concord to New Hampshire. But you guys oversold the cold and undersold the walk. The walk was brutal. I mean, you guys should do it tomorrow. I wasn't ready for the 19 miles, but we did it. We did it together. And we're going to do all of this, the reform together, and Governor Buddy Roemer is going to walk tomorrow. Congressman Sarbanes, who's a real fighter and a hero for us in Congress, walked today in the morning. It was a great conversation with him. So I want to tell you who I am for those of you who don't know me and why I'm here, okay? So yes, I worked on MSNBC. I had the 6 o'clock show there. I worked on Current TV. That was Al Gore's station. But mainly our show is online. We've been online before I was on TV. We're online afterwards. As you can tell, I'm glad I brought a Young Turks shirt. Not my AC/DC shirt, but so we because this is a kind of an obnoxious shirt, but we did it for our billion view party, and we're at 1.5 billion views overall online, 55 million views a month. So when I was on MSNBC, I got about 700,000 viewers a night. Online, we get 2 million viewers a night. Thank you. So I'm the host of the show. I'm the CEO of the TYT Network, which is 38 channels. You should check every single one of them out. But I'm, in this context, more importantly, the founder of Wolfpack. And so why in the world did I form a super PAC to fight against all the other super PACs? Was it because I wasn't busy enough? No. So a TV show, an online show at the time, and running the network kept me plenty busy. No, I did it, and somebody asked me today, one of the film crews that we were filming on the walk, they said, well, it's such a long odds, and you've all got all this other stuff to do. Why'd you do it? I did it because I had to do it. I had to do it because what a lot of people don't recognize is that our democracy is lost. It's not, hey, if we keep going in that direction, we're going to lose it. No, it's already gone. The donors are the ones that count. They're the ones that are represented. You all are not represented at all. I got bad news for you, okay? The good news is on the state level you are, and I'm going to get back to that in a minute, okay, because that's really important. But at the national level, they don't give a damn what you think. I mean, you give me any issue and I'll prove it to you. Gun control. Okay, so a lot of people are split on gun control, but on federal background checks, we're not split at all. 93% of Americans are in favor of federal background checks. Did we get it? Nope, because they're not representing you. They're representing the donors, and the NRA is backed by the gun manufacturers, gun users. NRA supporters overwhelmingly favored federal background checks. Did you know that? That 70, 80% of NRA members back federal background checks. Nobody gives a damn. The only people they care about is the donors. In that case, it's the gun manufacturers. Social Security, they say, poll after poll, 84% say, under no circumstances should you cut Social Security. I don't care what you have to do. Do not cut it. Are we clear enough? Well, President Obama proposes cutting it. The Republicans love it. Luckily, they haven't reached a deal yet, okay? But they can't wait to do it. Now, in a democracy, if 84% of the people say don't do that under any circumstance, would their representatives be considering doing it? Of course not. But we don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic lost, okay? It's already gone. So I remember I was at one of these gatherings of constitutional law professors because I was trying to figure out how to solve it. Every single issue I do on the show comes back to, sorry, the guys with more money won, okay? And usually that's sorry because I'm a progressive. Progressives lose most of those issues. We don't lose all those issues. For example, we win on gay rights, and because we have more money on gay rights than they do. So all the conservatives who think, you know, we win on whatever they think they're winning on. Like, I don't know why they think they're winning when we give away $5 billion a year to oil companies and oil subsidies. How did you win, schmuck, right? You didn't win. We all lost. The companies won, right? Corporations that have basically stolen our government have won, right? So conservatives, sad day for you, man. You're never, ever, 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 ever going to win on gay rights because we got more money. And money's the only thing that talks on every single issue. I could prove it to you. I do it night in, night out. They're like, all those idiot pundits on TV, I used to be among them, who are like, oh, gee, I wonder which way this one's going to go. Really? I think I'm batting 1,000. I can tell you which way each issue is going to go by just telling you who's got more money. And for example, immigration. So I'll do it ahead of time. And then when it happens, you'll say, oh, yeah, he said that, right? So are we going to get immigration reform? We actually are. Now, whether it's going to be good immigration reform is a different question. But so now Republicans want to make sure that they get the Latino vote. Democrats, of course, want to say, hey, we did something for you Latinos. But that's not why. The Chamber of Commerce came out in favor of it. End of the conversation. It's over. We're going to get immigration reform. But the kind of immigration reform we're going to get is the kind the Chamber wants, with a lot of cheap labor, okay? And are they going to get a pathway to citizenship? Well, the Chamber doesn't really care about that much. They just want the cheap labor, right? So it'll be something along those lines, and they might not even get a pathway to citizenship. And the Democrats will go, oh my God, Obama, he's classic Obama. Oh, the Republicans made me do it. Oh my God, I can't believe it, right? No, the Chamber controls both parties. So I'm, we're in the disaster. Okay, and we got to find a way out of it. Because if you don't try to find a way out of it, then you're saying, yeah, we lost our democracy and that's it. Now we live in a government run by the rich and the powerful and, generally speaking, multinational corporations. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm a serf in that system, and I bow my head. So are you going to bow your head? Now, look, there's a favorite chart of mine. It's not up here tonight, but it shows productivity and hourly wage for the average American worker, right? So the good news is actually from 1945 to about 1978, 1980, right in that ballpark, productivity is going up and wages are going up. Same exact line. They're almost identical, right? So when they tell you like, liberals are like herding cats and, liberals are no good, they can't get anything done anyway, yada, yada, bullshit, Okay? Here's what liberals did between 1945 and 1980. They crushed everything in their path. They were super strong. They got Richard Nixon to pass the EPA and OSHA. Ralph Nader broke Nixon's back and drank his spinal fluid. Okay? Liberals are weak? My ass, did FDR look weak to you? No, we had a golden time when the multinational corporations did not run the government. Okay? And look, I'm going to talk a lot about corporations in this context. Understand something. I'm not against corporations. So I have a small business. It's an LLC. We're the Young Turks LLC. We're a corporation. There's a reason you need corporations. It's limited liability. It makes sense. Okay? That's one thing. It's another thing to say, hey, this legal fiction that we have created, this robot, this machine, this amoral machine, go ahead and run our government. Okay? So corporations are not immoral. They're not evil. That's silly talk, right? They're amoral. It's not in their DNA. I know because we wrote their DNA. We're the guys who created these machines. We said, here's a legal fiction. Your job is to maximize every red cent, and if you don't, you will be fired. Okay? And another guy will come in, and he'll crush whatever he has to crush in his path to make sure he maximizes every red cent. It's one thing for those corporations to exist. It's one thing to build a robot like that. It's another thing to say, oh, by the way, later you can go ahead and bribe all the politicians legally, and they'll work for you. And they won't represent the American people, they'll represent you. That's mental. That's ridiculous. And that's the current state of America. And I can tell you exactly what two decisions did that, and it wasn't Citizens United. Citizens United shot a dead horse, okay? It was in 1976, Buckley v. Vallejo, they said money equals speech. 1978, they said Bilotti, well, corporations we already decided were human beings. Pause there for a second. Raise your hand if you think a corporation is a human being. Let the record note that Mitt Romney was not in the room and no one raised their hand. Okay. I mean, think about that. Isn't that insanity? A human being with inalienable rights endowed by their creator? We're their creator. We didn't endow them with inalienable rights. The Supreme Court did that. Lewis Powell writes a memo in 1971 for the Chamber of Commerce, says, hey, wouldn't it be great if we took over all parts of the government and we did propaganda in the schools and in the media and we took over the legislative body and the Supreme Court? And Nixon says, yeah, that would be great. How'd you like to be on the Supreme Court? And Lewis Powell's the deciding vote in Buckley v. Vallejo and in 1978, Bilotti. And in Bilotti, they say corporations, since they're human beings, have First Amendment rights, and since we already decided First Amendment rights means you can spend unlimited money in politics, have at it, Hoss. And when I talked to Ralph Nader, which I've interviewed him several times and yelled at him a couple of times over some of the elections he participated in, I asked him, what happened? I mean, you're running roughshod, right? Nixon's like cowering in the Oval Office looking at you. And then all of a sudden you run into a brick wall. What happened? He said, Tony Coelho happened. Who the hell's Tony Coelho? He's a Democratic congressman from back then. And what he did was, as soon as those decisions happened, he went over to the rest of the Democrats and said, hey, guys, turns out we can take corporate money too. And that was that. And then you know what happens to that graph from 1978 on? Productivity continues to skyrocket. Okay, congratulations, American workers. You did a great job. Okay, wages, boom, flatline. That difference between wages and productivity is the money you earned but never got. For decades, they've been robbing you blind because they have to. It's in their DNA. We told them to rob you. And then the Supreme Court said, go ahead, buy the politician. Now, if you buy a politician and you pay them, there was a great quote by one of the guys who got caught up in the Keating scandal. In fact, it was Keating himself. They said, hey, when you bribed all these politicians, did you expect to get something back? He said, yeah, why else would I bribe them? Of course I expected something back. But we turn that bribery now into legalized bribery. So they write him a check. And these congressmen and these senators, you know that they spend about 60% of their time? Isn't that unbelievable? 60% of their time calling, say, oh, can you give me a legal bribe? Can you give me a legal bribe? Please, pretty please. I swear I'll listen to you and you only. I swear I won't give a damn about my voters. And all I'll do is listen to you and suck up to you, right? We're talking to Congressman Sarbanes this morning, like I said. Now, he's a great guy. He does not take super PAC money. I don't know how he gets elected. Bless his heart, okay? And he's trying to fight back, and he's got a bill that you should really look up in Congress to make that happen. And so I said, so, hey, do you ever hang out with the other congressmen, Republican or Democrats, go to lunch or something? He said, are you kidding me? Nobody's got time for lunch. If they see you at lunch, they'll pull you out and say, you got to go make calls. These guys are dialing for dollars every single day, day in, day out. So do you think they're representing? Did they call you? Have you gotten a call recently? I didn't get a call, right? Now you got a lot of money, you're going to get a call, okay? And you think they're not listening to those people? Remember, they're going to run in 2 years. They got to go back to that guy and say, hey, remember how I delivered for you and didn't give a damn about my voters? And I did whatever you told me to do? Well, give me money again. Okay? They have to raise, I think it was Tom Daschle said, $10,000 a day to get reelected. $10,000 a day. Okay? You know what this is called? Taxation without representation. So when my conservative friends across the country say, hey, you know, I don't like taxes and I don't like big government, I say, I hear you, brother. Now, I would like taxes if it went to my cops and to the firemen. I don't want my house to burn down, okay? It went to teachers. I want my kids to get a good public education. I got a great public education way back in yesteryear, right? But that's not what it's going to. It's going to oil subsidies. It's going to corporate jet subsidies. It's going to farm subsidies. It's going to the Pacific Trade Trans-Pacific Partnership, I should say. It's going to all these different things that are not for our benefit. It's for their benefit. I mean, think about it. Mitt Romney has the gall to run for president. Guy paid 12.9% in the years that he knew he was going to run for president. Imagine what he paid before that. He pays less than 13%. We pay more than that. Why? Because if the rich are the ones that are setting the rules, guess who they're going to set them in favor of? The rich. Again, there's nothing wrong with the rich. I like Oprah. I like my dentist. I like my doctor, okay? There's nothing wrong with the rich. But if you say to the rich, you get special privileges, you get to set the rules in your favor, and your secretary will pay 25%, but you'll pay 12%, well, that ain't right. That's not fair. That's not democracy. So that's why I formed Wolfpack. And I named it Wolfpack because I wanted them to know we're tired of it, okay? And we're going to be aggressive, and we're going to come after you. So if you don't like it, that's a sad day for you, okay? So there is a way to do this. Now, the most important thing, and Professor Lessig will tell you a lot more about this, is apathy, okay? And people say, oh, you're right. Okay, you're right. You know, it's money in politics, taxation without representation, but there's nothing we can do. That is the great lie they feed you so that you don't do anything, okay? Because if you got together, couldn't we all, we're an overwhelming majority of the country, including Republicans, including libertarians. Couldn't we beat them combined? Of course we could. Of course. Look, the example I use is the suffragist movement. Now, how in the world did they get the right to vote when they couldn't vote in the first place? Right? It's incredibly hard. Now, the movement overall took 70 years, but from their first march, okay, in Washington, they did a march on Washington, so this stuff's not new. Okay, they did it back in 1913. It took 7 years for them to get the amendment. Okay, so sometimes it's a long fight, and sometimes when you actually get more active and you're in the streets, it goes a little quicker, okay? So of course it's possible. So now, last thing on how we do it, okay? And this is incredibly important. Actually, you guys are a critical part of this. So there's two elements to our amendment. One is to end corporate personhood. The other is public financing of elections, okay? Because they work for the people who pay them. If we pay them, they'll work for us. But if they have to go get money from other people, then they'll work for those people and not us, okay? So as I've explained, I think those two parts are critical. So how do we get that amendment, right? Well, there's two ways to get an amendment. It's in the Constitution, and one is through Congress. Unfortunately, Congress is so corrupt. It's a virus in the system, and it has taken over the whole body of Washington, the whole body of government, okay? So how do you deal with that virus? You have to write a new code in. One more line of code, and that's this amendment, okay? It's the 20th Amendment. And by the way, every generation of Americans has passed an amendment, except one, us, okay? We're all sitting at home. The suffragists marched. You know, obviously, we had a whole civil war to get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Mike Minette is here. He's the director of organizing for Wolfpack. You should definitely talk to him afterwards. He needs your help in New Hampshire. I'll tell you more about that in 1 second. But, you know, we were just, or before the walk started, we were in one of the halls, government halls, and we saw the New Hampshire banners from the wars, from the Civil War, et cetera. And they're tattered, and we were thinking of all the guys who died to protect those flags, right? They picked up bayonets and bayoneted one another, right? You can't pick up the phone and make a phone call to your state rep or senator. So I'm going to tell you exactly why that makes such a big difference. So Congress is corrupt. The virus is complete. So 2/3 of Congress is never going to agree to that. We couldn't get 60 votes on the Disclose Act. Disclose Act is just tell us who's bribing you. Okay, keep taking the bribes, just tell us who's bribing you, right? And first time around, we got 59 votes. The Republicans filibustered it. Second time around, we got 53 votes. We lost votes. We lost momentum, right? They're gone. They're gone. They're useless, okay? That's my opinion. A lot of people have good opinions otherwise. Okay, but there is a second way, and that is Article 5 of the Constitution says you can call for a convention of the states to propose amendments, okay? Now, our founding fathers were absolute geniuses. They knew for a fact that one day federal government would get too corrupt and that you would need the states to rescue us, okay? Now, again, something our conservative brothers should agree with, okay? States' rights. This is the most important state right, to say you're doing it wrong and we're going to fix it. Thank you. So you go to the state level. If you get 34 states to say we are going to call for a convention, you propose amendments at that convention, and then 38 states have to ratify it. You don't need Washington at all. You don't need them. This is an end run around Washington, okay? And look, at a convention, a million things can be proposed, although that's not really true. They're limited conventions, and they're about what the states actually say that they're about, okay? But let's say they propose 3, 5. I mean, in my ideal world, they would only propose our amendment, right? But you have to ratify with 38 of the states. Do you know what's the one thing that we all agree on? Is it being pro-life or pro-choice? No, we don't all agree on that. You can name any issue and we don't all agree on it. The one issue we agree on is that our politicians are bought and money has corrupted politics. We call it money in politics. Conservatives call it crony capitalism, and they're right about that. That's exactly what it is. Okay, the one issue that can get 38 states of the 38 states in here to ratify is getting money out of politics. Okay, so there is a way to do that. Now, for example, here finally in New Hampshire, HCR 10 is already proposed. So New Hampshire could actually be the first state in the union to call for a convention. Representative Tim Smith has called for one, and you can back him up. So if you want to know how to help, instead of saying, oh gosh, oh well, look, all these terrible things, you actually just make 3 calls. That'll do it. Look, here, just do this experiment with me, okay? If everybody in this room, if half the people in this room make those 3 calls, and you can get it from Mike or me, I'll give you the pamphlets afterwards, okay? The 3 people you have to call, we already know it. You don't have to guess, okay? You make those 3 calls, and I will guarantee you that that passes in New Hampshire. And then New Hampshire will lead another revolution, okay? And this time, it's to get our democracy back. It is possible. It's going to be done through the states, and you and I are going to do it together. Okay, now, finally, before Buddy Roemer and Professor Lessig come up here, I got to tell you that this idea that Professor Lessig has here is brilliant. Look, we talk about New Hampshire, and we're up here, and we did the 19 miles, et cetera, because it's really important. You guys are, in a sense, lucky, right? You live in the one state that people care most about politically. It's kind of neat, right? I wish I lived in that state. Not on a day like this, because I live in California, but but in California, nobody cares. I mean, in order to get elected senator in California, I mean, you have to spend tens of millions of dollars. Nobody's coming by and say, hey, you in Los Angeles, what do you think? They don't give a damn what we think. But they do care what you think, okay? Because all the presidential candidates have to come through here. They have to literally come through this exact building, right? And so you all get to ask them, hey, what do you think about the corruption in Washington, and what are you going to do about it? Okay, that's why I walked 19 miles and my calves are pounding and I'm all cramped up, because it's a great idea by Professor Lessig. And when you hear the ideas tonight and whenever you hear about them, they're all good, but you've got to pick one and you got to fight. Okay, if you don't fight back, it's no longer our government. And from what I understand in New Hampshire, you all are not in favor of that. Okay, I believe the motto is live free or die. Right? So thank God we don't have to pick up a bayonet. But let's pick up a phone and let's make it happen. Let's fight back against the machines and get our government back. Thank you.
Thank you, Jank. Joining us next, we have Governor Buddy Roemer. Buddy Roemer has served as the former Democratic governor of Louisiana, a member of the United States House of Representatives, and was a candidate for the presidential nominations of the Republican Party. He has helped to rewrite the Louisiana Constitution, founded one of the few banks not to receive a federal bailout, and was selected as a Kennedy Fellow at Harvard University. After his run for the Republican nomination for president in 2012, Roemer heads the not-for-profit Reform Project, designed to eradicate the institutional corruption of Washington, D.C. by unlimited, undisclosed special interest money. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Buddy Roemer.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry I was running a little late tonight. My plane from Chicago was a mess, ran late, and I got lost as usual driving around New Hampshire. But it's good to be back. The books to which I will refer tonight include Larry Lessig's book, A Republic Lost, and Peter Schweizer's book, Extortion. I came to New Hampshire in the April month in 2011, running for president. I had not run for elected office in more than 20 years. And I had almost no name recognition. Who is Buddy Roemer? People would ask. I further reduced the perception of my viability as a candidate by refusing all PAC money, something I had always done in running for office, governor and Congress. By refusing all corporate assistance, cash or information, by refusing all assistance from D.C. lobbyists, by limiting individual contributions to $100 per person for the entire cycle, and by requiring full disclosure of all assistance that we received. Now, I ran to win, not to make a point. Being relatively unknown is not a flaw or fatal in the early stages of a candidacy. In fact, early on, it could be an advantage. You can define yourself. I knew money would be tight, very tight. But money was my issue, and to run without special interest money would make me free to lead when I won. Free to build coalitions, free to actually solve problems. I thought that's what America needed in the gloomy days of 2010 and 11. I ran to win. I decided to use social media, a new phenomenon in America. It was powerful, and we'd try to use it to light revolutionary fires across a disillusioned and disgruntled younger population. Plus, I knew there was a key. There were already scheduled, when I announced for president, three dozen nationally televised debates. 3 dozen. They ended up being 42 in the Republican primary alone. And I'd always been good at that format. Not always a winner, but always competitive. And with a different message, money owns D.C., you don't, and a fresh face, I thought we could get 5 million Americans to do something they had never done before, give $100 to be able to speak with and be proud of a president. 500 million. I ran to win. I thought the Republican field was decent but mediocre. I thought that my record was clearly distinctive from anybody else running. No one else, Democrat or Republican, made campaign reform an issue. None. My record was clear. I never accepted PAC money. I always instituted limits. I had taken campaign reform initiative in a state that had been far too tolerant of political corruption. I was the only candidate running who'd been elected a congressman and a governor. And I had always fought for campaign reform in both places. I had touched, smelled, and fought the corruption of Washington, D.C. And finally, I looked around me and saw where political corruption had led America. A capital addicted to special interest money and refusing or unwilling to deal with tax reform, energy reform, trade reform, bank reform, budget reform, or comprehensive immigration reform. All of these things need to be addressed and solved, but they will not happen without campaign reform. They will not happen without a Congress and a president free to lead. They will not happen unless we act first. That's what I thought, and that's what I think. Now, the party found a way to keep me off the stage. It was mighty interesting. In the early months, when no one knew me, my poll numbers were non-existent, and they had a ready excuse when I called before every debate. Well, buddy, if you just get your, or they called me governor, governor, if you just get your poll numbers up to 1% or 2%. In the middle stages, when our social media had worked and our numbers began to rise, not big, 3%, then 4%. They gave me an excuse in the middle stages that my fundraising was still too low to be a viable candidate. And then in the last months, they used an excuse. This is when my poll numbers reached 7% in the Gallup poll, ahead of 6 other Republican candidates. They used the excuse that I was the only candidate, even though I was the only candidate who had qualified for federal election matching funds, I had not been invited to the first 25 debates, so they couldn't invite me to the last 17. So we were forced to pull out without a single debate to discuss the issue in this campaign. Reform of an electoral system that is controlled by special interest and politicians who seek re-election by deliberately not solving problems, but keeping them alive. Oh, you need me, folks. I can solve this. Let me stay in Washington. I'm making progress. There are 145 elements in the tax bill that require an annual or every 2-year re-up, not made permanent, just so the politicians can, I think, extort money from those who give. I don't think that we can get this done without a couple of concrete plans of action. One, there are a variety of ways to climb this mountain. There's not just one way for campaign reform. I personally believe that we should not allow corporate contributions. I believe that we should not allow lobbyists to give money. I believe that super PACs ought to be outlawed. I believe that there should be an alternative for anybody who wishes to run for office with a $100 limit and a 5-to-1 federal match appropriated annually by the Congress. Cheap for freedom. Cheap for freedom. I believe there should be criminal penalties for those who violate these rules. Then finally, this has got to come from a combination of a leader that we choose who makes this the issue. And I don't know who that is, and we can't be worried about what party she belongs to or he belongs to. We can't be worried about region or color or education. We have to be worried about integrity and commitment. If this is going to be the top issue in America, we have to make it our top issue. All these Republicans can't just look for a Republican candidate. All these Democrats can't just look for a Democratic candidate. We have to look for the right candidate for our issue. Grassroots, grassroots. Now this will be tough. We have a culture of corruption in Washington. I've been there, folks. I guess I might be the only guy on this stage who spent 8 years in the United States Congress, didn't have a single fundraiser, didn't take a single penny of PAC money, met everybody who knocked on my office door, went 4 times for re-election when nobody ran against me, not one person. And the issue was not me. The issue was no money, and they knew it at home. Free to lead. It's not going to be easy. The politicians that I talk to, and I talk to many every month, excuse it, rationalize it, justify it, hide it. It's a culture. They have Lance Armstronged it. The only way to win is to take the dope. I don't want to do it, but everybody else does it. Read a book called Wheelmen. If you want to see what Washington, D.C. looks like, read Wheelmen about Lance Armstrong. Took dope from the beginning because it was the only way to win. That's Washington. They make money, not law. Nothing is permanently solved. I call it bribery and extortion. This morning in the Wall Street Journal, front page, that's my newspaper as a businessman, had a big picture of the former governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell, and wife. Now listen to this, and I quote, I wrote this down on the plane. This is the first paragraph of the Wall Street Journal. Ex-governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell, and wife, charged with using his office to promote the Virginia-based company Star Scientific, Inc. by arranging meetings for its chief executive with state officials and hosting events at the governor's mansion designed in part to encourage state university researchers to study the company's products. At the same time, authorities charged Mr. McDonnell and his wife Maureen solicited and accepted more than $135,000 in loans and gifts. Guess what? That happens in Washington every day. Members of the banking committee didn't take $135,000 from the big banks. Some of them took $435,000. Everybody winking and nodding. And many of them, when they graduate from Congress, get a job with UBS or Citibank or Chase. To do what? To lobby their old members. You know what that's called? When your place in line is determined by the fact that you have to give a check, you know what that's called in America? Corruption. Do you know what it's called when the size of your check determines your place in line? It's called corruption. And that's where we are in America. A little bit at a time, winking and nodding, doing it because others do it, doing it because you have to do it to win. The most important thing to a member of Congress is re-election. He arranges meetings. You get him re-elected. He gets paid to do this job already at about $180,000 a year with all the power and the glory. But it's not enough. He wants your check so he can get re-elected. The parties are just alike. Don't fool yourself. I've been in both of them. I know that's unusual, and maybe it'll make me disloyal. But I spent 25 years as a Democrat, and I spent 20 years as a Republican, and I can tell you they both are well acquainted with the darkness of corruption. Where do they stand on campaign reform? I'll tell you what we need, and I'll close. We need an intervention. When you see somebody in trouble, when you see a nation in trouble, when you see a neighbor in trouble, when you see a son or a daughter, you step up, don't you? You got to step up, New Hampshire. We've got to make this the issue. Now, there are many other important issues. Don't misunderstand me. Fairness, growth, comprehensive immigration, budget reform. My God. I'm not trying to take the money out of politics. I want to know how a woman running for Congress or a man can manage their budget. I mean, one of the most important jobs they do is deal with a couple of $1 trillion of our money a year. I'd like to see them be accountable and account for it. What I'm trying to do is disclose it and keep it out of the hands of the special interests. I think America has so much left to do. Stand up, New Hampshire. I think America needs to be strengthened in this fight. Stand up, New Hampshire. I think America has left so many of its citizens behind. Stand up, New Hampshire. I think America can sing and teach and lift and lead and dream again. But it starts here. It starts in New Hampshire. Thanks.
Thank you, Governor. And finally, coming up next, we have Professor Lawrence Lessig. Together with his work at Harvard University, he is also the founder of Root Strikers, a network of activists leading the fight against government corruption. He has authored numerous books, including Republic Lost, How Money Corrupts Our Congress, and A Plan to Stop It, and also One Way Forward, The Outsider's Guide to Fixing the Republic. Lessig serves on the board of Creative Commons, Maplight, Brave New Film Foundation, the American Academy, Berlin AXA Research Fund, and iCommons.org, and on the advisory board of the Sunlight Foundation. He is a member of the American Academy for the Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Association, and has received numerous awards, including the Free Software Foundation's Freedom Award, Fast Case 50 Award, and being named one of Scientific American's top 50 visionaries. Lessig holds a BA in Economics and a BS in Management from the University of Pennsylvania, an MA in philosophy from Cambridge, and a JD from Yale. Prior to rejoining the Harvard faculty, Lessig was a professor at Stanford Law School, where he founded the school's Center for Internet and Society, and at the University of Chicago. He clerked for Judge Richard Posner on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and Justice Antonin Scalia on the United States Supreme Court. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Lessig.
So as I think about what I want you to recognize, I realize I could just say this and step off the stage. Think about the two men you've just seen speak. I've known both of them for many years. I love each of them. They are dear friends. They are completely different people. Completely different people. They each have excelled and they each will be superstars in their field, but if they sat down and they talked about the politics of what America should do, from gun control to the budget to climate change legislation to the issues around Wall Street, I'm sure they'd have 1,000 arguments before you. Yet these two fundamentally different souls stood here and agreed about something fundamental, passionately argued about something fundamental about this democracy. These two souls from two different sides of a political spectrum see the same thing. And this is an important fact, an incredibly important fact. Gallup did a poll at the beginning of this year where they asked Americans, what are the top issues that our government has got to solve? And as befits the polarized character of our nation, they ordered the issues according to whether the Republicans ranked them, or the independents ranked them, or the Democrats ranked them. And the Republicans and independents and Democrats rank issues differently. So number 9 on the Republican list was the rich-poor gap. That was ranked number 6 for independents and Democrats. Number 6 on the Republicans' list was ethics and morals. That was number 9 for the independents and number 7 for Democrats. Number 4 for Republicans is the federal deficit. That's number 5 for independents, and of course number 9 for the Democrats. So this is a picture of just how different we Americans are. But then look at the line I've erased, because this is the punchline. When they asked Republicans and independents and Democrats, what's the most important issue that we have got to address, that we have got to solve, that we've got to find a way to move beyond, the number 1 answer for all of them was the same: government. This is our number 1 problem, our government. Now, by government, they put together dissatisfaction with government or Congress or politicians, poor leadership, corruption, abuse of power. But here's the point. The point you've just seen tonight, the point that Buddy and Cenk showed you. This is the one thing that we Americans all agree about. Something fundamental has gone wrong with our government, and we have to find a way to fix it. Now, something is a little bit too ambiguous. It turns out we know what thing has gone wrong with our government. We know it. We did a poll before the Gallup poll by the Global Strategy Group. And we asked Americans, do you think our current political system works well? We were trying to figure out whether they were listening or not. And of course, 80% said it is in need of reform. We asked them, do you think our political system is corrupt or not? 71% said it was corrupt. But then we asked them, how important is it to you that the influence of money in politics be reduced? And 96% of Americans said it was important that the influence of money in politics be reduced. 68% said very important, but 96% said important. Now, it turns out there are about 7% of Americans who are lobbyists, so that kind of explains what the 4% is about. But this is the measure. This is the Cenk and Buddy show. It is all of us who believe the influence of money in politics must be reduced, 96%. Now, that question, 96%, begs the question, what do we mean by influence? What is that influence that has to be reduced? What's its character? What's its nature? And the thing to recognize when we think about this problem with money in politics, see, it's really cute the way I do the dollar sign at the end of politics. That's the money in politics way to say it. Okay, so politics. The problem with money in politics, this influence, can either be an influence that's operating on Americans through the political campaign ads that are put out there. That could be the problem with the influence, but I don't think that's in fact the problem people think about when they think about the influence of money in politics. What they're thinking about is the influence on government itself, on the politicians themselves. Because this is the problem. The problem with Washington is not the amount of money, it's not how the money is spent. The problem with Washington is the way the money is raised. The way the money is raised. The problem is not the speech the money buys. The problem is the fundraising itself. That is the dynamic that produces the corruption that Buddy Roemer just told you about. The fact is, members of Congress and candidates for Congress spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress or to get their party back into power. And it doesn't take a PhD in psychology to think this through. We need to think, what does it do to them to spend their time dialing for dollars to people all across the country, raising the money they need to get back to power or to get their party back to power? B.F. Skinner, a professor of psychology at Harvard, gave us this image of the Skinner box, which is a device which, I don't want you to listen to Skinner, which is a device to show that you can teach even a stupid bird exactly what sequence of buttons it needs to push to get the food it needs to get its sustenance. We need to recognize this is the picture of a modern American congressperson. As they sit there on the phone and learn what buttons they must push to get the sustenance they need, they learn it just like the pigeon does. At least I didn't put a rat up there. That might have been more appropriate. But any animal can learn it as they do it again and again for hours and hours. They learn how they need to speak. Now, in fact, I don't think the fact they call people for 4 to 6 hours a day is a bad thing. If they were randomly calling their constituents for 4 to 6 hours a day, that might be a good thing. If they were randomly calling their people they're representing and saying to them, what do you think? What do you think's going on? What do you think of what we're doing? That would be progress. Because then they'd be listening in the way that pigeon was to what their constituents thought, and they might be more responsive. But they're not randomly calling their constituents. What they're doing is calling a tiny fraction of Americans. And indeed, if you look at the statistics that are published by Open Secrets, you can see that who they're calling is 0.05% of America. 0.05% of America are getting those telephone calls, while 99.95% of America are not. 150,000 Americans are the recipients of those telephone calls. Turns out that's about the same as the number of Lesters in the world. In America, I know this is true because the internet told me that. That led me in my TED talk to sort of characterize our democracy as Lesterland. That's where we live, Lesterland, because it's this tiny number of Americans who have this extraordinary power because they are getting the calls by the pigeons who are trying to raise the money they need to get back to Congress. Now, as they do this, as these congressmen do this, as these quintessentially human people do this, as any of us would, they develop a sixth sense. a constant awareness of how what they do might affect their ability to raise money. They become, in the words of the X-Files, shape-shifters, as they constantly adjust their views in light of what they know will help them to raise money, not on issues 1 to 10, the issues their constituents might even notice something about, but on issues 11 to 1,000. Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes that when she went to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, "Always lean to the green." Then to clarify, she went on, he was not an environmentalist. So this is the point. They live this life constantly recognizing what they must do to please the 150,000 Americans who are funding their campaigns, and they slowly bend themselves in that direction. And as they do that, this is what they believe. Whether it's true or not is not important. This is what they believe. If they don't win the fundraising game, they can't win the election. If they don't win the fundraising game, they can't win the election. And so they try as hard as they possibly can to win the fundraising game. Now, we should recognize what this means we've built in America. We now have a system of 2 elections in America, 2 elections. There's a voting election, a discrete event, which happens on a particular day, twice every election cycle, the general election and the primaries. A discrete event. And there is the money primary, an event that happens continuously, 24/7, between one election and the next, as politicians are constantly pleading with their funders to give them money. Now, in the voting election, citizens get to vote. All citizens get to vote if you're 18 or over, some states if you have an ID. But in the money primary, it's the relevant funders of the campaigns who get to vote, the relevant funders. So the voting election, we all as citizens participate. The money election, 0.05% of us participate. Now that picture of a, quote, democracy, end quote. You know it's a democracy because your civics teacher told you that. Cenk told you it's not, but what does he know? That democracy, that picture of a democracy, that picture is a picture of corruption. Corruption. Now, I don't believe it's corruption in the old-fashioned brown paper bag secreting cash to members of Congress type of corruption. It's not corruption in the Rob Blagojevich sense of corruption. What I'm talking about is not any criminal act by any member of Congress. I'm perfectly willing to believe these are perfectly decent, hardworking, honest people. It's a little bit of a stretch for some, okay, but hardworking, decent, honest people who are doing what they can inside of a terrible system, which is why 15 years ago, in his presidential campaign, beginning here in New Hampshire, in Bedford, on June 30th, 1999, John McCain said his campaign was going to be about the, quote, system of corruption in Washington. The system of corruption. He wasn't talking, he said, about individuals. He wasn't calling out particular senators as being corrupt. He said that system corrupts all of us. All of us are corrupted by the system. And he launched a campaign here to focus on that problem. System of corruption. Corrupt because it is not a government representing, as the framers promised it would, all of us, a government dependent on the people alone. It's not the government they designed where we the people stand on top and they are dependent on us. The problem with this government is that increasingly there's another dependency, the dependency on the funders. That additional dependency, that competing dependency, that conflicting dependency is corruption. It is the dependence corruption. It is a system of corruption. Whatever flavor you want to call it, we have to call it for what it is. It is corruption. Now, 96% of Americans think that influence of funding has to be reduced. And these guys, these are pundits, don't think it's a serious problem. They don't think it's a serious problem in the political sense. because they believe Americans don't care about this issue. They believe Americans don't care enough about this issue to do something about it. To do something about it. And they use as evidence for that the fact that it's hard to get people out and rallied around this issue. Indeed, someone said to me, your friend Buddy Roemer proves people don't care about this issue. Because you've seen who could be a more articulate spokesman for this cause, who spent years in this state, and yet you didn't see him at the top of the ballot in January 2012. But I think the pundits are wrong here. And it turns out this is the very first time ever the pundits have been wrong. But it turns out this time they're wrong. And here's the clue to why they're wrong. Though 96% of Americans believe the influence of money in politics should be reduced, what we found in that same poll was we asked then, how likely do you think it is that the influence of money in politics is reduced in the next few years? How likely? And we found 91% of Americans think it's not likely. It's not likely. They want it, but it's not likely. And so what this means is when you take 96% wanting something and you set it up against 91% who believe it's not going to happen, what that produces is resignation about the issue and acceptance about a reality you don't like, but what are you going to do about it? When I was a young kid, I had to resign myself to the fact that I was never going to do that. It was a hard fact for me to accept as a young child because I really wanted to do that. And I think, if we did a poll, we'd find 96% of Americans would want to be able to do that. But at least 91% of us realize none of us are ever going to do that, which explains why most of us don't leap off of buildings regularly trying to do that. What we do is resign ourselves to the fact that only Superman flies, and we will not fly. We resign ourselves to the fact it's not possible, so we don't try. We don't try. But here's the fact. You know this fact is true. It must be possible. It must be possible. We don't have a choice about whether it's possible or not. We don't have that choice. Because the problems we face as a nation are just too great. And the commitments we have to our children and our parents are just too real. It must be possible. So when Buddy came to talk to me about his idea to run for president, and I encouraged and supported him, I recognized as I saw the fact that he was shut out of the process because the pundit said, it's not possible to win without taking the big money. I realized what we needed. What we needed to do before he ran was to have a little conversation, a little quiet conversation with the people in New Hampshire. And say to the people of New Hampshire, you've been sitting like couch potatoes as the politicians have been blasting their commercials at you every 4 years. I guess it's every year. They do it all the time now, right? Every 4 years telling you what to do. You've been sitting there and listening politely. But this time, you got to turn the table around. This time, you can't just play the game with them. You got to change the game they play. This time, you've got to ask them and force them to address a question they don't want to talk about. In July of 2012, Gallup asked Americans, what are the top issues the next president should address? And even though no one would listen to what Buddy was talking about, number 2 on that list was the corruption in Washington. The corruption in Washington. And by corruption, nobody was thinking about Rod Blagojevich or Randy Duke Cunningham. Those issues were not before the American people. What was before the American people were the unbelievable amounts of money being spent by super PACs. That was the issue that people were talking about. And when people were talking about that and they were asked, what should we fix? They said, fix the corruption. But did Romney or Obama even mention that issue? Was it on their webpage, even at the very bottom of the list of things they were going to address when they got to Washington? No, it was invisible, completely invisible, because they're embarrassed. You know, it's like you're living next to an alcoholic. And when you say, what should that guy deal with? The first thing on your head is, he's got to deal with his addiction. But what does he talk about? What does he talk to his friends about? Not his addiction. So we had to find a way. We have to find a way. We should have found a way to get New Hampshire to get together and say, look, you know, we can do this differently. We can talk about these issues differently. We can get people to talk to us differently. We can get them to show us the respect of talking about the issue we think is the most important issue. Because in July 2012, it was number 2. According to the poll we just ran, it is number 1 today. Number 1. But they won't talk about it unless you make them. And this state alone has the power to make them. Because they will be in your living rooms, in your coffee shops, on your front steps, on your streets, in your Rotary clubs, in this place 100 times. Yesterday, I understand Donald Trump was here. 100 times you will see these people. And you can ask them directly, look, I'm happy to listen to your mysticism about how you're going to create jobs and all that sort of stuff. I'm happy to listen to that stuff. That same stuff I listen to every single time. No, we like jobs. No, we like jobs. No, we like jobs. No, fine, I'll listen to that. But after you tell me this, we, the people, think this issue is the most important problem. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? That was the idea behind what we called the New Hampshire Rebellion. Now, we said rebellion because this is an amazing state. In its Constitution, Article 10 is a clause that expressly protects the right of the people to rebel. It says it is, quote unquote, absurd to deny the right of the people to revolution. It's one of only 3 states in the Constitution in the United States whose Constitution uses the word absurd. It's kind of cute, you know, absurd in a Constitution. So there it is. This is your tradition. You have that right protected. We didn't think too far down the road because, okay, Iowa, New Hampshire, the Iowa rebellion's fine, New Hampshire rebellion's fine. You know, South Carolina rebellion doesn't quite ring the same way, okay, but fine, we're focused on New Hampshire. And here's the facts. 15 years ago, here in New Hampshire was the focus for fundamental reform. July 1st, 1999, Doris Haddock, a.k.a. Granny D, started in Los Angeles at the age of 88 and started a trek across the United States, ending up in Washington 13 months later at the age of 90 with a sign on her chest that said Campaign Finance Reform. And as I said, on June 30th, this man came to this state and he talked about his campaign to be focused on the system of corruption in Washington. And he won in this state, I believe, and many believe, because he spoke about that issue and resonated strong with the citizens of New Hampshire, and then got in trouble for completely outrageous reasons in South Carolina, of course, none of his own doing. But this was the focus 15 years ago here. And we have to revive that focus. We have to find a way to bring back this issue in a way that makes it impossible for candidates to talk in this state without answering the question, what will they do about this problem? Now, the first step, we believe, to getting to that place is to begin to recruit people here, to volunteer to do a very simple thing. Some people might be afraid, but it turns out it's a simple thing. The simple thing is to ask a question. We want to recruit people to volunteer to go to every single event they can where a presidential candidate is speaking so that between now and 2016, at every single event, there is someone at that event who stands up and says, how are you going to end the system of corruption in D.C.? Now, you'll get pushback originally. What do you mean, corruption in D.C.? Who are the criminals? Who are the criminals? When John McCain started his campaign, Mitch McConnell went on the floor of the United States Senate. And he said, I want McCain to name names. I want the senator to tell me who he's talking about. Who are the criminals? You can't have a gang of gangsters without any criminal acts. So who are they? And McCain came to the floor of the Senate and he said, Mr. Senator, Senator McConnell, I'm not saying anyone individually is a criminal. I'm saying the system is corrupt. The system is corrupt. All of us are corrupt because of this system. So the first pushback when they say, who are the corrupt people is, I didn't say, how are you going to end corruption? I said, how are you going to end the system of corruption? And what is that system of corruption? What 96% of us believe. The influence of money over politics. That is the question they must answer. And then, as they ask that question, we will collect the answers. We will have volunteers who capture the video of those answers, and we will post it, and we will invite people to critique it so there is a dialogue, a conversation, a way to make in the surface of that campaign this issue as the number one issue. So that's the objective, to begin that conversation. And to begin that conversation, we took some steps. Quite literally, we took some steps. In fact, many tens of thousands of steps, because we have since January 11th been marching from Dixville Notch, and on Friday we'll end up in Nashua, 185 miles across New Hampshire, and you might remember it's January. 185 miles across this state to begin to recruit and rally people to this issue. And as we've done it, this incredible band of brothers and sisters and I, as we've done this, we have found extraordinary passion among New Hampshireites for this issue. Most passionately in the North, where people almost cry and scream for someone to take this issue up and do something credible about it. They come out of their houses, they put signs on their front lawns, they honk their horns, they stick their thumbs out of their window. Some lean out of the window. That's a bad idea. Don't ever do that. But they yell and they support what we're doing because they agree this is the critical issue. And we've had enormous connection and response. And we've had an amazing set of volunteers who have been trying to put this together. I've been asked to show this very short little video that was done by one of our original Root Striker volunteers to capture what has happened over this week. So I'm going to give you this 2-minute video right now. You can go to sleep if you want, but I'll wake you up in a second. So we're walkers, and we are walking to help build the movement of ordinary citizens who are not running for anything, but are out here trying to convince the rest of us we actually have an opportunity. 50,000 New Hampshireites could change the presidential election. If 50,000 New Hampshireites got together and said, this is my issue, that would change 2016.
But everybody came in here and asked, why are people walking? The government problems, has always been there for centuries, decades. And it's going to take more than one person or a group of people to step in and do something about it. And with the small towns that you guys are doing are probably a good start.
I thought they're very dedicated to be out on a day like today and very sincere about it. And it's good to see that people want things to go back to where they were, you know. That's what built this country.
I just want to make sure everyone's hit the restroom and topped off water bottles before heading outside.
Pretty good. You know, I worry most about my feet.
Yeah.
And they're just getting a little tender, but they're fine. I don't have any big blisters or anything, any real nasties.
That's perfect. All right, so Band-Aid, moleskin, and we're golden. For like an hour, and then
If it weren't for Larry, clearly I would not be walking down the length of New Hampshire, and I won't be doing it for a day, but it's been an amazing experience to be walking with these guys. And
we didn't expect was how quickly everybody would know about it. So as we're marching down, street, people are honking or coming out and waving, and
It's beautiful. Well, the interesting thing about New Hampshire is that, because the presidential primaries come through every 4 years, they're very political. They're very politically aware.
when you meet them and talk about it, the standard thing the pundits say is that nobody cares about this issue. But the reality is they don't care about this issue because most people don't believe it's possible to fix it.
I'm really here because I am devoting my full-time effort to the movement to get money out of politics. Because I believe it's the root cause of most of what's wrong with our country.
This is what this country needs, is just some basic reforms. We're not off track by too much, but we got to get together on something like this, and I think it would work.
Like, amazing group. I've said to a couple people lately, I've never before had been randomly thrown in with a large group of people and then liked all of them so much. And then the people that we met in New Hampshire have been incredible. And it makes me feel like it's possible, like we're going along and affecting each place that we're at and then carried on this wave of support forward. I feel like I believe in hope and optimism again.
So in the audience, you can see the people who've been marching, and they're wearing their shirts. And I'd just like you to acknowledge what I know all of you feel like now for what they've been doing. But here's the skeptical question. Is it possible? Is it really possible to do something here? And the numbers are a reason why this seems eminently possible. This is a state with just 1.1 million people, 750,000 voters. But if you look, for example, at 2008 in the Democratic primary, the difference between Clinton and Obama was 8,000 votes. And in 2012, the difference between the top two, Romney and Paul, was about 40,000 votes. So imagine, out of a population of 750,000 voters, if we can recruit 50,000 of them, just 50,000 of them, to commit themselves openly and strongly to make this the first issue, not the most important issue. They might care about the deficit or about tax reform. They might think that's the most important issue. But the first issue, because they recognize if we don't fix this issue, we can't fix any other issue either. Like with the neighbor, you realize unless he addresses his alcoholism, he can't address any of the other problems he faces. It's the first issue. If we had 50,000 people to ask and demand an answer to this and push back when they get non-answers to this question and recruit others to support this, imagine the shape shifting then. As the advisors to those political candidates coming into this state begin to say, hey, look, how are you going to distinguish yourself from 30 other Republicans? How are you going to distinguish yourself from 4 other progressive Democrats? What's going to make you look different? And then shape-shifting becomes our friend. As they discover, oh, I was with Buddy in 1983 when he was taking on the bank lobbies without money from the banks. I've been with this issue from the very beginning. And when they say that, let's not call them on it. Let's encourage it. Let's encourage their newfound commitment to the issue we think is number one and most important. Now, as I've done this, as I've walked this, I've learned something important, I think, about the nature of how we engage and get people working. I've discovered what many people have known and I've been oblivious to for my whole life. The important place in our politics of the walker. There are people who run. Buddy was one of those people. They're important. We need them. There are people who sit. I was one of those people. I met Granny D never in person. I met her because she wanted to be a guest blogger on my blog. I sat most of the time writing and submitting things for, and she wanted to be on there when she ran for Senate in 2004, so that's how I met her. I was a sitter while she was a runner. But in addition to people who run and sit, there are people who walk. And it's different from both. Granny D walked, but others, of course, through our history and through world history, have been important walkers. And walking does something. In the hours it takes to cover the 20 miles that we covered for many of the days, today just 18, there's time for conversations about why are you here? What are you doing this for? What makes you leave your family, as Bruce did with his young children, and come spend 2 weeks on the road? What makes you do something like this? And as you have those conversations, you build bonds, friendships, commitments. These are my brothers and sisters. I will be with them for the rest of my life. We will always be connected, always connected. And you build the strength this movement needs of people who have seen and felt the pain of 20 hours, 20 miles a day, but the commitment and the passion we've seen in response. We become walkers. I call myself now, and all of us I think are GD walkers, and don't think that. That's Granny D walkers I'm saying here. We are Granny D walkers. And we will move this cause ahead through this act. But it turns out this act of walking is particularly relevant to this fight. Particularly relevant to this fight because of this man, also a walker. So this is a man named Dr. Lonnie Smith. Dr. Lonnie Smith lived in Texas in the early part of the last century. And Dr. Lonnie Smith, as you can see, is African American. And in Texas, until 1942, African Americans were not permitted to vote in the primary. The Democratic primary had a rule that said no African Americans can vote. Now that might puzzle you, because you probably remember that after the Civil War in 1870, we enacted a 15th Amendment that expressly said you could not deny the right to vote on the basis of race. But then some clever lawyers figured out how to, in fact, deny the vote on the basis of race. And it went to the Supreme Court a number of times. And in 1937, the Supreme Court unanimously upheld the right of Texas to exclude African Americans from the primaries. Unanimously. But Dr. Lonnie Smith didn't believe in America anyone should be disenfranchised. So every election, he would get up, he would walk the 4 miles he needed to walk to get to the polling place. He would pay his poll tax, because then there was a poll tax as well as exclusion. And he would say to the worker, the polling station, I would now like my ballot. And the worker would say, Dr. Smith, you know you are not allowed to vote. And he would say, thank you, and he would turn around and walk home. And that simple act of peacefully, defiantly, walking to demand what every citizen is entitled to in a quote-unquote democracy, built recognition, built a movement. And Dr. Lonnie Smith is the plaintiff in the case Smith versus Allwright, in which the Supreme Court finally made it all right by finally ending the 70 years of discrimination that had blocked African Americans from participating, not just in Texas, but across the whole South. Now think about what the Old South was then. The Old South was a place where there were 2 elections, a general election and a white primary. And in the general election, all citizens got to vote, but in the white primary, only whites got to vote. The court got it eventually Most Americans recognized it when they saw it, but that is not a picture of a democracy. That is not a picture of a democracy that lives to the ideals our framers gave us. Now, you recognize that picture, right? You recognize that picture. Because it's this picture, too. We now also have a voting election and an exclusive primary. It's the money primary. But unlike the white primary, where 88% of the citizens of Texas were allowed to participate, in this primary, in this exclusive primary, it's only 0.05% of Americans who get to participate. It's not even the majority. It's not even the 1% minority. It is a 20th of 1% minority who has the power to determine the primary that determines who's elected, that determines the policies our government will consider. Every walker is an inspiration. Granny D was an inspiration. Dr. Smith is an inspiration. And as I think about the fight that he helped push, the fight that African Americans participated in, the fight that white Americans helped African Americans participate in to enfranchise Americans, a fight of the minority against the majority. Not quite as extreme as the one that Zhang told you about, where women who didn't have the vote eventually got the vote, but just about as bad, a minority fighting to get the vote from a majority. If they can win that fight, we can win ours. We're not just the 99%. We are the 99.95%. The 99.95%, and we can build a movement to claim our rights to equal dignity as citizens too. So please, join us in that fight. At our site, you can learn how to walk with us. There are just 2 days where you can have that privilege. Tomorrow is a difficult one. The next day is not quite as difficult. Tomorrow we get to Merrimack. The last day we go from Merrimack to Nashua, 6 miles, and we welcome all comers. Or you can sign up on our site to be part of this movement, to be part of the 50,000, and I hope you sign up on this site also to pledge to be one of the people who stands before these candidates again and again and again and says, how are you going to end the system of corruption in Washington? Now, you heard this slogan before, we can do this. But I don't think that's the way we should think about this. It's not that we can, it's that we must do this. We must do this. Because we have children, and we have parents, and we owe them. We owe them things that we need a government to help us to secure to them. A future, security, a healthy planet, an economy that grows again. We owe this to them. And if you organize, we can give it back to them. So Robert Frost was right. I can guarantee you the woods are lovely, dark, and deep. But we all have promises to keep. And miles to go before we sleep. Just about 25 miles before we can sleep. Thank you very much.